Russia has pulled a trick straight out of the old war books. It is rewriting its history books. For the first time since the invasion of Ukraine, Moscow has now released a newly written history text for its schools. And it calls this new edition as the state's point of view. No points for guessing. It talks about the war in Ukraine, something that Kiev and its allies have described as an invasion and nothing less. But Moscow does not call the war in Ukraine to be an invasion. It calls what it is doing in Ukraine to be a special military operation. And there are many countries around the world that simply describe what is unfolding in Ukraine to be a conflict, walking the tight diplomatic rope, irrespective of what you call it. This, remember, is an old tactic in a new war, and this is what every nation does when they go about this exercise of writing their history books. Now, just days before the 11th grade students across Russia are going to return to schools, their history textbooks have now been rewritten. It covers a period from 1945 till the 21st century, so it features sections on Russian soldiers saving peace in 2014, which is when, remember, Moscow had annexed Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine. It also has denounced the Western sanctions and has praised the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and has justified that operation as denazification. It was written in record time of 5 months, something that the Kremlin is also boasting about. Now, the war has made Russia unleash an unprecedented crackdown on dissent, and it has also been extended onto schools now. The Kremlin is tightening its control over the historical narrative. And this is the trend that is commonly seen under President Vladimir Putin, but the earlier leaders in Russia, the former Soviet Union, have also done this. So let's take you through some of these since the invasion started last year. Just 6 days after the declaration of war, Putin signed into law a media bill that had categorically criminalized objective reporting about the war in Ukraine. Even the use of the word war in describing the situation in Ukraine has been prohibited inside Russia. As we said, Moscow wants to only call it a special military operation. And this has led to the closure of the leading independent news outlets and also designating many journalists and publications as foreign agents. Now, Moscow was quick to also update its national security strategy, something that it hadn't touched since 2015. The war with Ukraine had brought traditional values to the fore. And now the NSS has indicated that Russia's cultural and historical memory is front and center of Kremlin's security concerns. The decision to rewrite history books aligns with this concern. The internet has been another key tool to build a specific narrative by Russia, so much so that it looks like Moscow has been trying to contemporarily leave the internet and build an internet of its own. The test of Russia's sovereign internet has seemingly failed, but that is a different matter. But the fact that it tried to build a digital ecosphere in void of what you and I function in is what is important. Now, instruments like the internet, media, and even education have long been tools for propaganda. It didn't start with Russia, and it certainly is not going to end with this war. But a war in the 21st century has a lot to do with narrative than was previously thought. From where Vladimir Putin is standing, winning the information war is as important as winning on the battlefield. And this is not a new thing, remember. Every nation tries to put forth the narrative that it wants and therefore goes about controlling the media and its history books in a similar manner. And to give us more insights in terms of how all of this will, of course, play out, we're being joined by Mr. Peter Kuznick, who's joining us live from Italy. He's a professor of history and the Director of Nuclear Studies at the Institute of American Studies. Mr. Professor Kuznick, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, this is a question that is as old as time. The victors always go on to write their histories, but Russia is rewriting its history books at a time when it is in the middle of a war. And what is interesting is it does not even call what it is doing in Ukraine to be a war. So, Professor, how do you look at this exercise by the Russians to rewrite their history books?
I think this is what George Orwell warned us about in 1984. We change our language, so war becomes peace. A war and invasion becomes a special military operation. And we know that, as was said, he who controls the past controls the present, and he who controls the present controls the future. And so the governments understand how important it is to control the history that is taught to students. Vladimir Putin is not the first, as you said, and he won't be the last. We've had this battle going on inside Japan for years. In the United States, Oliver Stone and I wrote our Untold History of the United States, books and documentaries, in order to combat the official U.S. interpretation of history. We're saying that the history that's taught to most students in American high schools, like what's happening in Russia, is a false history, a history that's presented to make America look as good as possible, not to tell the truth. But we think it's so important that students get a critical perspective, because unless they have a critical perspective, they can't understand that their countries could be much better, that we could make a different future. As our view of the past is limited, so our view of the future is limited. And it's sad to see what's happening in Russia today. I mean, I used to go to Russia, and there was a lot of debate about history. But now, if you speak against the Russian invasion, if you call it a war and not a special military operation, you can get put in jail. There used to be much more freedom of the press in Russia, open discussion. Now there's very little dissent and very little freedom in Russia.
Absolutely, indeed. And also, Professor, because you teach history, give us a sense of, can there ever be anything like objective history? Because it's not just Russia, it's not just the United States. There are countries around the world that are not happy with their past. And they want to not write their future, but they want to rewrite what has happened in the past. They want to erase what has happened in the past and give a completely different narrative to it. Can countries actually really ever succeed when they try to do this kind of rewriting of history?
No, you're asking a good question, and there can't be an objective history because history is based on interpretation. And so different historians can look at the same facts and actually come up with a different interpretation of what they mean and how they came about. When we're talking about the history of our countries, whether it's India or Russia or Japan, the United States, anywhere we choose, it's very important to say that it's in the interest of the state to make it look as clean and antiseptic and positive as possible. But the reality is often very, very different. In the United States now, there's debate over slavery. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, presidential candidate, wants to talk about the positive aspects of slavery, a horrible system, and which one should not find positive aspects. It's like the Holocaust. It's like the massacres that go on. There's not a positive history. Russians are being taught that the invasion of Ukraine was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Well, they've exaggerated. The military aspect might be true, but the Nazi aspect has been greatly exaggerated, and they're using this to justify an invasion. There's a lot that's gone on that precipitated this, and all sides are at blame. Absolutely. NATO's to blame. Russia and Putin are to blame, but this kind of whitewash does not allow an honest discussion.
Absolutely, indeed. Professor Kuznick, thank you very much indeed for joining us and putting it all in perspective. A pleasure speaking with you there.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.